Using Your Literacy for a Purpose: How I Began to Enjoy Reading and Find My Purpose, a literacy narrative by Anastasia D'Amico. My literacy experiences of loving to read and stepping into the minds of authors, along with teaching children to read, have shaped who I am as an avid reader and writer who appreciates the value of education and how it can change your perception on life. Growing up, my parents struggled with getting me to read for pleasure. It wasn't that I couldn't read. In fact, I could read pretty well for my age back then, since having grown up in a pretty well-to-do family who insisted I went to private schools until the age of 14. My problem was that I had thought that all forms of reading were unnecessary and could never be considered as fun. Not to mention, I was a competitive gymnast growing up, so the last thing I was ever worried about was school. Gymnastics was my life. I would eat, live, and breathe it 6 days a week and 4 hours each day. I drove my parents crazy with my grades and lack of motivation for my schooling. I nowhere valued education back then as I do today. My reading and writing strategies would have been considered lazy. It wasn't until the beginning of high school, when I quit gymnastics and had tons of free time, that I realized reading actually wasn't that boring as I had thought before. I found myself reading for fun. That is the first instance when I noticed myself changing as a reader and writer. I started reading books like The Hunger Games, the Pretty Little Liars series, and The Secret Circle. I went from a lazy reader to a little bit more interested. I was starting to find my identity kit. G describes an identity kit as an appropriate costume and instruction on how to act, talk, and often write, so as to take on a particular role that others will recognize. In the beginning of my senior year, I was going through my Instagram feed and saw a girl named Greta Evans that I followed post a picture of a book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Along with the picture was her caption raving about the book and how it changed her perception on life. Looking for inspiration at the time, I decided to purchase the book. Greta Evans, I guess, is who I would consider to be my literacy sponsor in this case. Without her posting the picture of the book, my thought process on life would most likely be much different. Brandt describes a literacy sponsor as any agents, local or distant, concrete or abstract, who enable, support, teach, model, as well as recruit, regulate, suppress, or withhold literacy, and gain advantage by it in some way. Be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best, were the four agreements Ruiz went in depth in his book. This book really helped me grow as a person, and I never would have thought that thoughts and beliefs on paper could make such an impact in a person's life. Reading the Four Agreements altered my thought process by opening my mind to new possibilities on how to live a more impacting life. I discovered that my favorite part of reading is understanding concepts in the author's point of view. This idea came from the agreement that says, do not make assumptions, meaning that by keeping an open mind, I am able to broaden my thinking and become more of an understanding person. It is like you are stepping into their mind. I apply this into my own writing sometimes. Whenever we are given something to argue, I always listen to the opposing side to understand that writer's point of view. It helps me in the long run become a better writer. I would definitely say that this reading by Don Miguel Ruiz was a literary event because it made me want to be a better person and realize how much I wanted to help other people find the enjoyment of reading and even to just learn how to read. It was my aha moment. He made me believe that in order to be a better writer and reader, I had to understand where the author is coming from and always listen to the other opinions because you may gain insight you never knew about. Heath describes a literacy event as occasions in which written language is integral to the nature of participants' interactions and their interpretive processes and strategies. After I finished The Four Agreements, I started reading The Mastery of Love by Ruiz and plan on reading The Fifth Agreement and many more of his books. They are extremely easy reads and really speak to you. Soon after I finished reading The Four Agreements, I traveled to Costa Rica, keeping in mind those four agreements. Little did I know at that time how much those four little agreements would change my perspective on education. Costa Rica is a place I go to about 2 to 3 times a year and have been for the past 4 years now. It is my own private Idaho. About 2 spring breaks ago, I got into a bad ATV accident and ended up in the local hospital in Manuel Antonio. It made me second guess my life and made me so much more appreciative. I knew after seeing those patients in the hospital, I wanted to give back. But when we were down there a couple months after, we were talking to a lady named Isabel, who was a friend of our friends. And in this story, she was my literacy sponsor. She began to tell us how she volunteered her time at a local orphanage about 3 hours north and how they were in need of donations, even more than the local hospital. Really inspired by this, I knew I wanted to help out and even just visit the orphanage instead of giving back to the hospital because they already received many donations from the government. So my family and I helped organize a donation box of used books, toys, clothes, and etc. to give to the kids when we went back in December. December came around, and on December 31st, 2014, we delivered all the toys, books, and etc. to the orphanage. It happened to be an all-girls orphanage right off of the Pan American Highway. We spent the day there getting to talk to the little girls as best as we could because we barely spoke much Spanish, and they barely spoke much English. We got to help them learn some English, and they helped us as well. It was fun to read to them, and seeing them following along and learning. Even though I know they would use the books when we left to look at the pictures, it was still fun to interact with their sweet souls and help them engage in reading. I feel like if Brant were watching this, she would consider myself a literacy sponsor for helping strike the girls' interest in reading and writing. I noticed while at the orphanage, the kids drew pictures and would tell stories almost as if they were telling their story or drawing their life. Now that I'm typing this, it made me think back to the reading about Keisha and Troy and how they would write about their current situations or the situations they grew up with. To support this statement, there is a piece in the article that states the literacy practices of our focal students were found to fulfill a number of related and authentic functions of their day-to-day lives. The whole experience at the orphanage is one I know I will never forget. It made me realize how much a simple education we take for granted. They valued reading and writing so much because it was their gateway to be successful after they turned 18. And if they didn't, they could end up on the streets in poverty. In conclusion, I find it amazing that one 138-page book could have such an influence on my life and inspire me to read other motivating books. Both concepts have shaped me into the reader and writer I am today. I value education so much more. With each assignment, I try to always complete them to the best of my ability. My mother would always tell me that education is the one thing that no one can take away from you. She was so right. I just wish it didn't take me so long to realize this. I can't wait to go back and visit those little girls and see how much they've grown and how far in their literacy development they have gotten. Overall, the 4 agreements helped spark my love for reading, turning me into an avid reader and changing my outlook on education with the help of visiting the children in the orphanage. As a writer, it helps me understand the value of education by making sure each assignment is completed to the best of my ability, follows all rules, and most importantly, helps show who I am as a person. Without the events of reading the 4 agreements and visiting the children in Costa Rica, I am almost positive education would not come first in my life like it does now.